My name is Hugh Van Gogh, and what a wonderful opportunity to co-present with my colleagues. Each of you present a very compelling uh, phenomena that we really help us understand the different aspect of humanities. I don't see the issues of the experience of men with violence somehow have to be considered in relation to others, gender, because I think they just simply help us to understand humanity a bit more fully. And I think there's a bit of a danger of comparison and making it something that binary when it's really about how do we holistically understand our community members. So I really enjoyed the presentations, and I hope mine also add a bit of the understanding of uh, men and boys' experience with violence and how it shaped their lives. To situate this presentation, I just want to share a bit about my work. My work is very much community-based research, and whatever I do is in the spirit of working with the communities to understand and to address it. So certainly, I am a first-generation immigrant, and my work very much study the people like me, and how can we strengthen the support for our young people. So I spent quite a number of years being social worker working with racialized immigrant youth, and life also took me to a mentorship role that helped to support our young people. And sometimes we failed, and a few young people passed away that also fuel the inspiration for us to come together to further understand why young people get into troubles with the law and end up in the situation that we did not want our loved one to be like that. So I spent about, by now, 10 years at least to work with community partners to always deepen our understanding, but also create intervention that support our young people. And I'm glad to share with you that there's a beautiful program in Calgary at the Center for Newcomers that I work with community members to develop a Real Me program, and it's been designed specifically to deal with highly vulnerable youth from immigrant and racialized backgrounds. So um, this presentation very much situated in that work, and it's a complicated, comprehensive piece of study. I just want to take a subset of learning to share with you in the context of this conference. And it's very much part of that ongoing work that we learn about the lives of 29 young men who were involved in gang during their teenage years. And how the learning from their lives help us to think about the kind of intervention that we have to design as communities to respond, to prevent, and to also provide intervention to those who have been involved. You can do next. So I thought maybe I should start with honoring the voices of the people that I had. It was many months of doing field work, visiting people in their home, sometimes going to correctional services, visiting them over time, including Christmas, and spending time to get to know their lives. And I think those kind of prolonged engagement and part of the desire to respond to community issues, invite them to share their stories in a way that I think is allow us to understand the authenticity of their struggles. And I can tell you that there was time I spent time with, a young person who very much recounted life in the way that I thought is just compelling and sincere and vulnerable, that allow us to not just feel sorry for their lives, but to think about what's happening to people that quite often beyond the headlines require deep sense of patience, understanding in order to find the knowledge, but also to locate the potential support that they might need. So this one, this is an interview from a young mixed person. Sorry, maybe I'll stay away from this. I think it's meant for the people online, but it's not for. All right. So this is a young man who recalled that when he was two, my dad almost killed me. I was crawling across the floor and kicked me. He kicked me in the ribs, and he used to beat me, my mom, because he thought she was cheating on him with somebody, and I wasn't his son. One day, my brother still has a scar. When I was 4, my dad was cleaning out his gun, and he actually shot. This is what he said to my mom, that he was cleaning out his gun. He accidentally shot my brother. Ever since, my brother wide-eyed like crazy. So I think that's speak to this extreme exposure to violence that quite a number of young men that I talk to live with in very early age. Another one that another young man share about how domestic violence was very much an integral part of his childhood. So when our parents beat us up, they slapped us so much that our head would hurt so much. And you would have black eye, they just abuse you. But this guy didn't follow religion that much. He came from Muslim background, and he talked about how the parents didn't quite live up to the values that they were exposed to. It filled me with hate. Now that I think about it, I think what they did was still wrong, and I think that they should have just talked it out with me. And he went on that I remember when I get beat up, I would be so pissed off and filled with rage. I would just go outside and chill with my friends and go fight with somebody because of that. It would take anger outside because, of course, if I could not raise my hand to my dad, but I would go outside and raise my hand on someone else. So you can see the beginning of how the violence now perpetuate into their interaction with others. And this is another quotation, and by now you can see that this is not just a slap on the bum, but rather the level of severity that young man could experience. And it came in a very extreme form in their interaction with the very people that they love. So my sister told my mom about my dad's plan to marry another person. My mom confronted my dad about that. That night in this room where we all slept, my father came out and electrocuted my sister. He plugged in a plug like that, and he ripped it open, and he electrocuted her right on the eye. We were all very terrified. And then he went on to talk about how it affected him the next day. I remembered after that happened, the next day I killed a kitten. Out of anger, I picked a big rock and started smashing it. That was like a big thing in my life from then when I did. That's okay. And that was the first time that it showed me that I had it in me. I think that's the awareness of his own violence to be like that. So that's perhaps, you know, the catalyst for him to be aware of his own dark side in how he questioned himself in terms of whether it was the experience of being prone to violence as a person. The next slide. And I think they also raise question a lot about the culture. Certainly when in the context of multiculturalism, quite often we often highlight the beauties of culture, but there's also the need to be critical about certain cultural practices or interpretation of cultural practices in a way that perhaps also perpetuate violence. So in this case, this young man questioned his father's experience or his own version of what it meant to be a Lebanese. So he talked about his father came from Lebanon. He was violent. He said it was part of our culture. It was in you. You get immune to it, to get used to it. He told me this one thing, and I remember it even now. He always said, if someone hit you once, you hit them 3 times. So that upbringing also perpetuate the legitimacy of violence in their lives. And another kind of violence that I think a lot of young men that I talk with exposed to is institutionalized systemic violence. So this is the young man who came from Burundi, where the state very much have there's a civil war, and it is a systemic effort to terrorize people. So this young man and his family were caught in that. I've seen lots of people that in front of me. I've seen people running behind me, beside me, and getting shot. My sister was close to being shot, but instead the lady beside her got shot. It wasn't a good thing to see. After the war, hundreds of soldiers, hundreds of mothers, hundreds of kids just lying around dead, and it would take about 4 to 5 days to clean up. So this kind of experience very much permeated into the memory. It affects the way that they see lives and their interaction with others. And at home, they suffer of violence. In the community, they suffer from violence. At school, it was not a safe place for many young men and either. So this young person talked about being kicked and spit for many years. Until 10, I was bullied probably once a week, and never make sense of why it happened. Just because he a brown person in the school. And he talked about the impact that all he did was turn into anger. I wanted to talk about it, but you know, who am I going to talk it to? So, and this led to the examination of the consequences of how violence impacts young men. So, and it reinforced the theme again of identities development. So when young people experience violence, they internalize the identity of the victims, of the oppressed, of the unwanted, of the inferior. So those became the identities that they taking on with prolonged exposure to violence. So this young man talked about, you know, how when he looked into the mirror, you can see from the quote that there's a great sense of anger, the angry, and this illusion about life. And the second one, he talked about himself as an outcast, the unwanted, somebody that would be bullied. And it eroded the sense of belonging identities in a way that they could not find home, either at home, in school, or in the community. So I'm giving you a abbreviated version of the analysis and the presentation of findings. But some of the key learnings that we have had in looking at stories and perspective and experiences that you have seen from those examples is that many of the young men who were involved in violence had very prolonged experience with violence during their childhood and adolescence. That it's not just occasional or a slap on the bottom, but really a severity of the violence that they have endured, and that it can be at the multiple levels of violence, from interpersonal, at home, at school, and it can be institutionalized and systemic. And here the complexity involved state and historical contemporary oppression. I think especially when you heard from our indigenous perspective and experiences, it may raise, it demand a different kind of analysis to see violence, not just in the form of the physical one-on-one, but also can involve state-sponsored kind of violence and the impact on boys. And it's also attended to it brought attention to belonging and identities that we also examine in how violence can unravel positive self-concept and identities and citizenship in ways that we also have to looking at rebuilding, extend their identities. So that takes me to the last slide, and we open for conversation, is that it's important that that we recognize and understanding the experiences of men and boys with violence during the childhood and adolescence, and their lifelong effects. Quite often, when people commit a crime, uh, it's a less forgiving in looking at their lives. Right? So it become a focus on their act and the action. But I think it's important for us to step back to understand, to recognize their experience, their own experiences with violence, so that we can think about a way that we can prevent the path that many young people would continue to experience. And also the need to address the interpersonal, institutional, systemic violence facing boy and male adolescents. As I said before, it's really easy to bring attention to interpersonal interaction, but I think there are historical contemporary contexts in which institution system can perpetuate violence. And therefore provide intervention and support that help repair, build, and extend identities, belonging, and humanness. There was a bit of a hopeful sign. We worked with a young person who really have gone through a lot of these difficult realities. And we were intentional in helping them to build positive self-concept, nurturing their confidence, helping them to think about what it means to be a good citizen, giving them a chance to assert leadership. We even invited to join a group study program with a university student to Ghana, where they had a chance to learn about what it meant to be a leader in a community that people look like him. And he came back with a commitment to, be a youth leader in the community, writing song, music, a different kind of person that we have seen. So I think it really convinced me that a focus on identity development, especially, now that we're talking about anti-racist intervention, in many ways, it gives us some guidance around how do we help young people to come to terms with their lives, to examine, to unlearn about how they see themselves, to repair the kind of identities that been affected by the life circumstances, but also to figure out how to extend their identities beyond being the victims of their circumstances. So those are the things that become perhaps a beginning of thinking about identity-based wraparound intervention for young people. So with that, I'm going to close and invite dialogues.